The spaceship, a silver teardrop against the velvet night, hurtled towards Earth. It was a sleek, advanced craft, designed for speed and stealth, now blazing a trail through the cosmos towards an uncertain future. The stars seemed to blur as the ship picked up speed, the vast expanse of space giving way to the blue and green orb that was Earth. Inside, Ilara clutched her seat, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had trained for this moment for years, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. The hum of the spaceship's engines was a constant reminder of the technology that separated her from the primitive world she was about to enter. She had studied the humans, their strange customs, their even stranger language. Hours upon hours spent in front of screens, analyzing their behavior, their history, their conflicts. She knew their leaders, their heroes, their villains, yet despite all this knowledge, she felt a pang of uncertainty. Would she be able to blend in? Would she be able to understand them in person? Now she was about to meet them face to face. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She had seen Earth from afar, a beautiful but chaotic planet. Now it loomed large in her view, a world teeming with life and unpredictability. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the mission ahead. Her mission, to observe and report back to her people. It was a task of immense importance, one that could shape the future of her entire civilization. She was chosen for her skills, her intelligence, her ability to adapt. But as the moment of contact approached, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. Little did she know her crash course in Earthling culture was about to get a whole lot more intense. The ship began to shake violently, the descent more turbulent than she had anticipated. Alarms blared, and the metal structure groaned under the strain. She gripped the controls, her knuckles white as she fought to keep the ship steady. The ship shuddered, metal groaning in protest as it pierced the Earth's atmosphere. The heat shield glowed red-hot, the friction of entry creating a fiery spectacle. Ilara's heart raced as she navigated through the turbulence, every second feeling like an eternity. She had to stay focused, had to ensure a safe landing. Ilara fought to control the craft, guiding it towards a secluded clearing in a forest. The dense canopy of trees rushed up to meet her, and she had to make split-second decisions to avoid a catastrophic crash. The forest was her best bet for a hidden landing, away from prying human eyes. Trees whipped past, branches scraping against the hull like claws. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of nature against metal. She winced as the ship took hit after hit, but she couldn't afford to slow down. The clearing was just ahead, and she had to make it. With a bone-jarring thud, they landed. The impact threw her forward, but her harness held her in place. The ship skidded to a halt, the forest floor tearing at its underside. She took a moment to catch her breath, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. The only sound was the ticking of cooling metal and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of moments before. Ilara listened intently, her senses on high alert for any sign of danger. Ilara unbuckled her harness, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had made it. She was on Earth. But the mission was far from over. She had to gather her equipment, ensure the ship was secure, and begin her observations. There was no time to waste. She was here, on Earth, alone. The realization hit her like a wave. She had no backup, no immediate way to contact her people. It was just her and the vast unknown world around her. She had to rely on her training, her instincts, and her determination to succeed. Ilara took a deep breath, the air thick and sweet with the scent of pine and damp earth. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The freshness of it filled her lungs, grounding her in the moment. She closed her eyes for a brief second, savoring the sensation. She cautiously made her way out of the wreckage, marveling at the alien beauty of her surroundings. The forest was alive with sounds and smells, a symphony of nature that was both foreign and fascinating. She had read about Earth's biodiversity, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. But the wonder was short-lived. A sense of unease crept over her, the feeling of being watched. She scanned the shadows, her eyes darting from tree to tree. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. A twig snapped behind her. The sound was sharp, distinct, and it sent a jolt of fear through her. She spun around, her training kicking in, every muscle tensed and ready for action. She whirled around, her hand instinctively reaching for the energy weapon strapped to her thigh. Her eyes scanned the darkness, searching for the source of the noise. She had to be ready for anything, but it was too late. The forest seemed to close in around her, the shadows deepening. She barely had time to react before a sharp, stinging sensation shot through her arm. A sharp, stinging sensation shot through her arm, and then darkness swallowed her whole. Her last thought was of her mission, and the hope that she would survive to complete it. Ilara awoke to the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, her senses overwhelmed by the sudden brightness. She squinted, trying to make sense of her surroundings, but her vision was still blurry from the abrupt awakening. Her head throbbed in time with the steady beep of a machine beside her, each pulse sending waves of pain through her skull. She tried to lift her hand to her forehead, but found she couldn't move. She was lying on a cold metal table, her limbs strapped down with thick, unyielding restraints. The metal was icy against her skin, sending shivers down her spine. Panic surged through her, hot and suffocating as she struggled against the bonds. Her breathing quickened, each breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Where was she? Who had taken her? Her mind raced with questions, each one more frantic than the last. She tried to recall the events that led her here, but her memory was a foggy haze. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the sterile white walls, the gleaming instruments that lined the counters, and the unsettling scent of antiseptic that hung heavy in the air. It was a place that seemed both familiar and alien. At the same time, this was no ordinary place. The technology was advanced far beyond anything she had ever seen. It was as if she had been transported to a different world, one where the line between science and magic was blurred. This was no ordinary place. The room was filled with strange devices, their purposes unknown to her. She could hear the faint hum of machinery, a constant reminder of the advanced technology surrounding her. A figure stepped into her field of vision, casting a long shadow across the room. The figure moved with a deliberate, almost predatory grace, each step echoing ominously in the sterile environment. A man tall and thin, with a receding hairline and eyes that glinted coldly behind a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles. His presence was imposing, and his gaze seemed to pierce through her, as if he could see into her very soul. He wore a white coat, and a stethoscope hung loosely around his neck, swaying slightly with his movements. The coat was pristine, almost unnaturally so, and it added to the air of clinical detachment that surrounded him. "Ah, you're awake," he said, his voice smooth as silk but with an underlying current of something off. It was a voice that was used to command, to instill fear and obedience. "Good. We have much to discuss." His words were calm, but there was an edge to them, a hint of menace that made her blood run cold. Ilara struggled against her restraints, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the cold metal digging into her skin, but she didn't care. She had to get free. "Who are you? What do you want?" The words came out in a rush, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. The words came out as a choked whisper, her throat dry and scratchy. She could barely recognize her own voice. It was so weak and frail. She tried to summon her powers, to tap into the energy that flowed through her veins, but something was blocking her. She was weak, vulnerable, and utterly at his mercy. It was as if a dam had been placed within her, cutting off the flow of her abilities, and utterly at his mercy. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless and terrified. The man smiled, a chillingly humorless expression that did little to ease her fears. It was a smile that promised pain, that revelled in her helplessness. "My name is Dr. Alistair Crane," he said, his voice a low purr. "And you, my dear, are the key to unlocking the universe's greatest secrets." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. She was the key. What did that mean? Her mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle, but the pieces were elusive, slipping through her grasp like sand. He leaned closer, his breath warm and foul against her cheek. She could feel the heat of his breath, the stench of decay that clung to it, and it made her stomach churn. "Whether you like it or not," he added, his voice dripping with malice. Ilara's heart sank. She was trapped, with no way out, and at the mercy of a man who saw her as nothing more than a tool for his own ends. Miles away, in a dimly lit pub filled with the comforting aroma of stale beer and wood polish, the air was thick with the hum of quiet conversations and the occasional clink of glasses. A man sat alone, nursing a pint of bitter, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced indifference. Liam O'Connell, ex-military, now a private investigator, was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. His face, marked by a scar across his left eye, told a story of battles fought and lost. Life had a way of knocking the cheer out of you, especially when you'd seen the things he had. The weight of his past bore heavily on his shoulders, each memory a ghost that haunted his every waking moment. He was a man of action, not sentiment, a hardened warrior in a world that had grown soft. The pub was his sanctuary, a place where he could blend into the background and escape the chaos of his mind. His phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against his calloused fingers. It was a small, almost insignificant sound, but it pulled him back to the present. He glanced at the screen, an unknown number. His instincts, honed by years of training and experience, told him this was no ordinary call. He picked it up, pressing it to his ear. The pub's noise faded into the background as he focused on the voice on the other end. "O'Connell," he growled, his voice rough as gravel. It was a voice that commanded respect, a voice that had seen too much. A shaky voice, barely a whisper, spoke on the other end. It was filled with fear, desperation, and something else, a plea for help. I need your help. They've taken her." The words were rushed, panicked, as if the caller was afraid of being overheard. "A girl, she's different. They're hurting her." The line went dead, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Liam's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the cryptic message. Liam stared at the phone for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. The voice, filled with desperation and fear, tugged at something deep inside him, something he thought he'd buried long ago. The voice had awakened a part of him that he had tried to forget, a part that still believed in justice, in doing the right thing. He couldn't ignore it. He didn't believe in coincidences. Every call, every message had a purpose, a reason, and this one felt different, urgent. He was a man of logic, of reason, but something about this call, about the urgency in that whisper, resonated with him. It was a call to action, a call he couldn't ignore, but something about this call, about the urgency in that whisper, resonated with him. It was a call to action, a call he couldn't ignore. The urgency in the voice had ignited a spark within him, a spark that had been dormant for too long. He drained his pint, slammed the glass down on the counter, and stood up. The decision was made. He couldn't turn his back on this, not now. He had a feeling this was a rabbit hole he needed to go down, and Liam O'Connell was never one to shy away from a challenge. With a determined stride, he left the pub, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Liam stood in the shadows across from the imposing building. Crane Laboratories. It had taken some digging, some favours called in, but he'd found her. The distressed call, the whispers of a mysterious girl, it all led back here, to this very place. A shiver ran down his spine. The place reeked of secrets, of things best left undisturbed. But Liam O'Connell never was one to back down from a challenge, especially when there was a life at stake. He checked his watch. 2:00, time to move. He slipped silently through the darkness, a ghost in the night. Years of training had honed his senses, his movements fluid and precise. He bypassed the security cameras, disabled the pressure plates, and picked the lock on the side door with practiced ease. He was in. The air inside was cold and sterile, the silence broken only by the hum of machinery. Liam moved through the corridors, his footsteps muffled by the linoleum floor. He consulted the floor plans he'd acquired, his eyes scanning for any sign of her. The air grew colder, the metallic tang of ozone tickling his nostrils. He was getting close. He could feel it.